Hey everyone, this is a special episode for me. I'll explain at the end why it's special. But first, I'm here in Waterloo, New York, and I'm visiting the first of 3 sites which comprise Women's Rights National Historical Park. So this house behind me is the McClintock house, right here. And the McClintocks, Thomas and Mary Ann, were some of the planners for the first Women's Rights Convention, which was held in Seneca Falls, just down the street, which I'll be getting to in a few minutes. The McClintocks in July of '48 hosted Elizabeth Cady Stanton, who was like the main planner, at the house here, and in the front parlor they drafted what became known as the Declaration of Sentiments, which was modeled after the Declaration of Independence. And that was like a list of grievances from women about their place in society and trying to address that. And it was drafted right in this house. And then a few days later, it was presented at the convention. Alright, so I misspoke a little earlier. I mentioned there were 3 sites that made up Women's Rights National Historical Park. There are actually 4. So I was just at McClintock House. And behind me now is the Hunt House. This is the home of Jane Hunt. It was actually here in this house that the initial planning of the convention for women's rights took place. So Hunt, Lucretia Mott, Elizabeth Cady Stanton, Mary Ann McClintock, they gathered here and started putting together what would become the first convention for women's rights. Alright, so now I'm at the Stanton House, and this is where Elizabeth Cady Stanton lived. She was one of the prime planners of the Women's Rights Convention across the river. She only moved in here with her husband and children a year before the convention. So she moved in 1847, and the convention was the following year. And she was just a regular housewife and mother when they moved in, and when they moved out in 1862, she was the leader of one of the biggest women's rights movements in the world. And this is where she lived. Alright, so I'm here in the Wesleyan Chapel in Seneca Falls. So this is the building where the first convention for women's rights was actually held. This is not completely the original structure, but it's close to it. You can see some of the old sections of wall behind me. So the National Park Service did a restoration to kind of bring the building back to what it roughly was. But this is where over 300 men and women gathered over 2 days on July 19th and 20th of 1848 to discuss the Declaration of Sentiments, which, as I mentioned earlier, was the document that had been drafted that presented grievances by women on behalf of women. And over those 2 days, they discussed it and kind of ratified it and presented it to the world. So such people as Elizabeth Cady Stanton, Lucretia Mott, Frederick Douglass, they all would have gathered here to talk about the Declaration and trying to, I would say, advance women's rights, but start the conversation about women's rights, because this was where it started. So this has been my little tour of Women's Rights National Historical Park. And as I mentioned, this is kind of a special episode for me personally. And so to explain why, I'm going to go next door into the visitor center, which is just down the block a little bit. And I'll see you over there. Alright, so I'm in the Visitor Center of Women's Rights National Historical Park, and this is a special episode for me because in the upstairs gallery I have my very own show. So these are all my images. In other videos I've mentioned, like, alright, I'm going to go take my pictures now. And well, these are some of the pictures that I go take. So I spent about the last 2 months getting these images together and printing them and mounting them. And I came here last weekend with the help of my sister, and we got everything hung, and it looks great, and I've had pretty good word of mouth so far. And it's up through Memorial Day. I take it down on June 1st is the last day to be able to see it. But yeah, so I'm pretty happy with this, pretty proud of all the work I put into it. So the theme of the show is places in the National Park Service where history actually happened. So like on this spot, this event happened, sort of stuff. But yeah, so it's pretty neat. If you're seeing this before Memorial Day of 2024, come to Seneca Falls and check it out. Otherwise, I'm going to wrap it up for this visit to Women's Rights National Historical Park. And I do have one bonus place to visit, so stick around and I'll show you that in just a sec. Alright, so I said there was going to be a little bonus material, and it's here right in front of me. And that is this bridge. It is the Bridge Street Bridge. This is the bridge that supposedly inspired the famous bridge scene from It's a Wonderful Life, where George Bailey jumps into the river to save Clarence. So that was inspired by a real event that happened on this bridge back in 1917, and where a young woman jumped into the river in an apparent suicide attempt, and an Italian canal worker by the name of Antonio Veracali jumped into the river to save her, but he couldn't swim, although he did manage to push her close enough to one of the banks that somebody else was able to save her, and then Veracali drowned, unfortunately. So that's where that scene from It's a Wonderful Life was inspired by, and the town of Seneca Falls in general was believed to be the inspiration for Bedford Falls from the movie. So if you're coming to visit Women's Rights National Historical Park, come visit the bridge that inspired It's a Wonderful Life. Thanks for watching.